Tensions are at a boiling point between the United States and Mexico. Mexico's president canceled a scheduled visit to Washington after the White House proposed a 20% tax on Mexican imports to pay for the border wall. The two leaders spoke by phone, but Mexico insists it won't be paying for that wall. To break it all down, we'll be joined by Barrios of the Mexican Council on Foreign Relations. But first, here's President Trump late last week.
NAFTA has been a terrible deal, a total disaster for the United States from its inception, costing us as much as $60 billion a year with Mexico alone in trade deficits.
Thank you, Mr. Barrios for joining us this morning. Great to see you. I want to start off with the news that unfolded late last week, which of course is the prospect of building the wall between Mexico and the U.S. and President Trump raising the idea of a 20% import tax to pay for that wall. What's your reaction?
Right. Well, I mean, he's very obviously making this up as he goes along, right? You have a country that has decided to elect a leader that has no idea what he's talking about. He very obviously has no idea how important the Mexican relationship is. Just like Canada, American national security and prosperity directly depend on a cooperative and stable Mexico. And that's basically what he's putting up in the air. So the way this plays out is if you continue to humiliate Mexico, you continue to alienate Mexico, one of two things could happen. You could have a reaction where we are no longer allies, because of course we can't be friends if we're not allies. And then at the same time, if you undercut the Mexican government enough, you could be creating the biggest refugee crisis in modern history. So it's one of those things where it's lose-lose. I think that the American president, in his strange style, which is quite frankly unhinged, I think he came up with this as a campaign promise. He has no idea how he's going to pull it off. He's going to be affecting American consumers with this idea of a tax. You can't discriminate against a country like that without running up into not only NAFTA rules, but also World Trade Organization rules. We have $580 billion worth of commerce. We have the most legally crossed border in the world. There are 35 million Mexicans and Mexican Americans in the United States, out of which 80% are either U.S. citizens or legal residents. And Mexico is the biggest destination, not just for tourism, by far, order of magnitude in fact. 26 million Americans visit Mexico, but also at any given time there's between 1 and 3 million Americans in Mexico, which is between 4 and 12 times more than Canada, which is the second destination. So you're talking about the two most integrated large countries on earth, and a direct dependency on behalf of the superpower vis-a-vis Mexican cooperation, information sharing, security, the operation of Homeland Security, the operation of the military, with which there is very ample cooperation. But of course, that could all end. So what's on the line here is peace and prosperity in North America, and I think that in his bravado, he's putting that on the line.
Given everything you've just said, what does Mexico have in its tool chest to fight back on the idea of a wall, the idea of a tax, all these things that are a threat to your country?
To begin with, on 3,200 kilometers that is our border, about 1/3 already has a physical barrier. Okay, so this idea that there is no physical barrier, there already is a physical barrier. There's like 35,000 border patrol officers. In fact, in congressional testimony, we have actually heard the head of Homeland Security say how he is more worried about the Canadian border than he is about the Mexican border, and because there is so much on that border. So with respect to this relationship, it's no longer just about NAFTA. It's about the whole relationship. It's about the fact that we are no longer, I mean, very evidently, we are no longer friends. And so the alliance is what's up in the air. Now, in a strange way, curiously enough, I think Mexico is doing the world a service, including Canada. Why? Because this crisis, this silliness, this very overt ignorance with respect to the relationship is coming to a head with Mexico. And Mexico, at the end of the day, we have absolutely no beef with the United States. We love the United States. We are integrated with the United States beyond what any other country could even conceive of. And so It's a good thing that we're doing this with Mexico, which in reality wants the best for North America, than this coming to a head with a crisis with a country that really wants to do harm to the United States. Having said that, it's obviously very, very difficult for us to be the test case of how the administration is so woefully inequipped to deal with foreign relations, if not much more.
You mentioned Canada. This week, a member of our government, Canada's ambassador to the United States, raised the possibility of a bilateral agreement with the United States if things go sour with your country. Do you take that as throwing your country under the bus, and what do you make of it?
Right. Well, that's sort of the Neville Chamberlain approach. The peace in there shall be trade in our time. I mean, it's silly. That's not the way that this administration works. If you spend, if you spend a few minutes actually analyzing how this sort of leadership style works, appeasement is pretty much the worst thing you can do. My advice to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is basically to stand on principle. I don't think he needs to antagonize the United States, certainly, but I think that just like Angela Merkel right at the beginning, I think he needs to be very clear about what Canadian values are. And based on those Canadian values, you can do a lot of things. But one of those Canadian values is solidarity with like-minded, important countries, because of course peace and prosperity in the entire continent are on the line. So he can come to the Americans and say, look, yeah, I understand that you have an affinity with Canada, and we are certainly grateful for it, but Canada, this is a trilateral agreement, and Canada does insist to sit at the table with all of your discussions with respect to Mexico. It's natural. There's no such thing as a Canadian car. There's no such thing as an American car. There's no such thing as a Mexican car anymore. These chains of production have been integrated. And so, as you know, once the finished automobile has actually crossed the border for the last time, the parts that make it up have crossed between 6 to 8 times those borders. And so we have to protect that because we keep each other competitive. And quite frankly, we have to protect that for the benefit of all North Americans. All of us on this continent, all 470 million of us, we need to protect this. And like I said, if it's all about World War II. I grew up several years in Ottawa, and I remember when Canadians were very, very cognizant of the lessons of the Second World War. This is exactly the same thing. These are the same sentiments that are being brought up like in 1930s Germany. And so to try to appease these characters is counterproductive. It's just a matter of time that he's going to turn around against Canada.
And finally, the Mexican president was scheduled to meet with Trump early this week. He canceled that meeting. Do you think that was the right thing to do?
President Peña Nieto was pushed into a corner to cancel that meeting. It was one after another. I mean, there's no way. If you believe that you can deal with anyone in this world, if you think that you can deal with a country and humiliate them to that level and not expect a backlash, you have no idea about human nature.
Thanks so much for joining us, Mr. Barrios Gomez.
Thank you very much, Bashi.